Coding is often an essential part of the process of qualitative data analysis. What is coding, and why do we need to code textual data in qualitative research, and what is the general process of coding? These are questions that we will briefly respond to. So first, coding. What is coding? Coding generally is the process of organizing and making sense of textual data. So as we know that in qualitative research, we generally have a big mass of data in text form. And this data comes through interviews with research participants. Then we transcribe those interviews. And so after transcription, when we are involved in the process of identifying patterns, themes, and categories, that is something that we call coding. Now, what is involved in the process of coding? Generally, the process of coding involves labeling segments of the text or the answers that we get through to our questions that we ask our interviewees. Generally, this is in the form of short phrases that we assign to chunks of data or keywords that represents meanings relevant to our research questions. Now, there are various types of coding that have been identified. The first one is called open coding. Generally, this happens at the initial stages where data is broken down into discrete parts and assigning labels. So as we mentioned in the beginning, generally qualitative data is based on large text. So we need to break that data down into discrete parts in order to understand and in order to find out main meanings in the data and to relate meanings across the various parts of the data. Then we have axial coding, which is actually relating categories to subcategories. So then there is categories of meaning, and then there are subcategories, so meaning inside meanings, and we need to relate that. So that process is axial coding. Then there is the process of selective coding, where we identify core categories and then we systematically relate those categories to each other. And then there is descriptive coding, which is like summarizing data in a word or a short phrase, or you can say encapsulating bigger meaning into smaller words or phrases. And then we have in vivo coding, which is like using participants' actual words. So the words that participants use, or the phrase or the phrases that sometimes use, they could have individual meaning. And so when we use those words directly, that's called in vivo coding. And then we have thematic coding. So what is it? Grouping ideas into broader themes. So although these are the various labels or names or unit types of codes, generally the process of coding is overlapping, and in many cases these various types overlap, and so it depends on the researcher what names or types that they want to that they use in the process of their analysis. We will now explain these one by one. But before that, we need to have an example of textual data. And so here is a hypothetical interview excerpt, you can say, or an example interview excerpt. The topic that this particular researcher has explored is students' engagement in online learning in secondary schools. So that's the research topic. What are the ways and means through which teachers try to engage, or what are the factors that impact students' engagement in the online learning process in secondary schools? So here is a sample interview excerpt with a student. So the interviewer asks, how do you feel about learning online compared to in-person classes? And so the student replies, honestly, it's harder to stay focused during online classes. There is too many distractions at home, and sometimes the internet just cuts off. The interviewer then asks the second question, what motivates you to attend online classes or online sessions? And the student replies, when teachers make it interactive, like using quizzes or breakout rooms, I feel more interested. Otherwise, I just tune out. And then the interviewer asks another question, do you feel supported by your teacher? And the student says, some teachers really try. They respond to messages quickly and explain things clearly. Others just post the word and disappear. So as you can see, this is a part of a larger interview where there are several ideas that are exchanged between the interviewer and the interviewee or the student. And so there are several ideas that we get to, and now we need to have an analysis of these in the light of our research questions. So the process of coding, as I mentioned in the previous slides, coding, open coding, axial coding, selective coding, descriptive coding, in vivo coding, and thematic coding. You can make use of all of these codes in a study, in an analysis, or you can make use of some of these. In either case, you have to justify. So for example, open coding example from that interview excerpt could be, the first one is coding type, then what it does, that code, and example code. So the first one, open coding, what does it do? It breaks the text into labeled concepts. And so example, connectivity issues. So this is an example of open coding. Axial coding links codes into categories. So challenges in online learning. Several codes have been combined together into this bigger code called challenges in online learning. Selective coding focuses on core themes out of the whole data that we collect from all participants together. And so here is an example. Effective teacher practices enhance engagement. Descriptive coding summarizes topics. So for example, interactive teaching is a code that summarizes a particular topic. In vivo coding generally make uses of the participants' exact words in order to represent a meaning or a theme. So for example, post the works and disappear. These are the exact words of the participant or the student. And thematic coding, where there is identification of broader meanings and themes. So for example, barriers to online engagement. Now, open coding, the second type of coding. So here are examples. Again, here is this interview excerpt or a part of the interview, and in front of it there is a code. For example, it's harder to stay focused. So the researcher has assigned the code difficulty concentrating. This is a code, an example of open coding. Too many distractions at home. Again, this is a code from the interview, and there is this code, home distractions. Similarly, internet just cuts off, connectivity issues. Now, this represents the code. Connectivity issues represent a problem in the online classes. Interactive quizzes, breakout rooms, again, interactive teaching methods. So in what ways do the participant want the process of teaching to improve? And you can see that. Respond to messages quickly, teacher responsiveness. So response to messages quickly means that the students want teachers to respond to their messages quickly. And this is coded as teacher responsiveness. And similarly, all these other codes are included as open coding. Now, axial coding. We have already defined axial coding, where several ideas are combined together. So for example, the category challenges in online learning. And so here, several challenges have been combined together into this code. And difficulty, for example, concentrating, home distractions, and connectivity issues. So three main codes combined together into a bigger category that is called challenges in online learning. Then teaching strategies, again, interactive teaching methods, one, and clear instruction. These two codes are combined together into the bigger category of teaching strategies. Teacher behavior, teacher responsiveness, and lack of teacher presence. Again, these two represent the bigger category called teacher behavior. And so an example of axial coding. And similarly, the student motivation code. Now, selective coding. What is this? In selective coding, generally we get to themes, and so here two main themes. One, effective teacher practices enhance student engagement in online learning. So one of the main themes that come out of this data is that effective teacher practices enhance student engagement in online learning. And the second main theme that comes out here is environmental and technical challenges hinder online learning. So the things that we now have the things that support online learning or makes online learning teaching effective, and those that actually hinder the process of online teaching and learning. Now, here is an example of examples of descriptive codes. So here are interview excerpts, and then in front of these we have descriptive codes. You can stop the video for a while and look at these. For example, the first one, it's harder to stay focused during online classes. And so the descriptive code here is attention span. Similarly, there is too many distractions at home. Home environment is like one of the issues. Then the internet just cuts off internet access. So you can see that a particular chunk of data or meaning inside data could be coded as maybe in vivo form, or it could be in descriptive form, and then these could then be expanded into axial coding or into themes. Now here are some examples of the in vivo codes. For example, it's harder to stay focused. So these are direct words of the participants, and so we call this in vivo codes. And similarly, pause the video for a while and look at all of these other in vivo codes. Moving on to the codes, and you can say thematic codings, where we actually move on from labeling data and from the subtypes of codes into bigger themes. So for example, the data that could be linked to the theme barriers to online engagement. Here are three short quotes that we could turn into a theme. Harder to stay focused, distractions at home, and internet cuts off. So you can combine these together into a theme, barriers to online engagement. Similarly, interactive teaching inside quotes, feel more interested, quizzes, breakout rooms. So you can combine these into a theme, represent by this theme. Interactive pedagogy increases motivation. And similarly, you can read these other codes and then you can link these to these themes. So to summarize this process of coding and searching for themes inside qualitative data through the process of coding, you can see there is a code name. You can present this in a tabular form, and you can call that a code book, where you can say display the codes in a tabular form or in the form of charts supported by data or chunks of data or codes of data. So for example, code name attention span, type of code is descriptive. In vivo code means the code that directly represents this code is it's harder to stay focused during online classes. You can describe this code as difficulty maintaining concentration during online sessions, and this is related to the theme barriers to an online engagement. A theme could have several codes together. Similarly, then we have these other code, distractions at home, and it's in vivo because it uses the words of the participants. And so there is too many distractions at home, and then environmental distractions at home that interfere with learning. So that's the description of this code, and then barriers to online engagement. And similarly, the last one. This table 2 is an extension of the previous one, so you can stop again the video for a while. You can look at the code name. You can look at what type of code it is. You can then look at the in vivo codes that represents these codes, and then you can go and see the description of these or the definition of these particular codes, and then you can see the themes to which these codes belong. Now moving on to the presentation of the theme. So once you have coded the data, analyzed the data, and coded the data, the next thing that comes that is something that qualitative researchers or the process of qualitative data analysis involves, is to turn and to present the data or your findings theme-wise. So in this case, we have some sample example themes. For example, the first theme or theme 1 is barriers to online engagement. So this is how you present a theme. You first of all describe the background of the theme, then you support that theme by a quote or by several quotes from the data. It depends on the nature of the theme and the data that is available to support that theme. So for example, barriers to online engagement. Here, this is how you describe it. Students frequently reported difficulties in maintaining attention during online classes. Descriptive and in vivo codes such as attention span, distractions at home, and internet issues reveal that both internal and external factors disrupted focus. So now to support this conclusion, this is the kind of conclusion by the researcher. To support this conclusion, here a direct quote is given, which is from student A. But this theme could be supported by quotes from more than one participant. So it could be student A, student B, student C, and so on. Again, it will depend on the sample and the type of data and the quantity of data that the researcher has collected. So for example, to support this theme, here is this quote: honestly, it's harder to stay focused during online classes. There is too many distractions at home, and sometimes the internet just cuts off. So these comments, to end this theme, the researcher or the writer need to have a comment on the theme, the support the theme has got, and then to conclude it. So the last paragraph just does this. For example, these comments suggest that unstable learning environments, lack of physical separation between school and home, and connectivity problems significantly impair students' engagement. Such barriers were especially pronounced among students lacking a quiet or dedicated workplace. So this is like theme 1. Again, remember, you can support a theme, and you should support a theme by more substantial data, more quotes from and you should also look critically at every theme. It's not just support, but in some cases there could be themes, there could be quotes from the data that are opposite to, or that are opposite, that represent the opposite views. So we need to do that in certain cases as well. Here is theme 2, where interactive pedagogy, which is named as interactive pedagogy increases motivation. Again, in the beginning, the researcher says that his or her data shows that interactive pedagogy increases motivation. This is then supported by this quote from student A, which is like given in this blue highlights. And then there is a conclusion from the researcher. So again, you need to read this, stop the video for a while and read it to understand. Then we have a third theme, which is the role of teacher presence and support. Again, the theme has been defined in the beginning. A background is given. The theme is then supported by a quote from student A. It could be any student or any respondent, or it could be several respondents supporting whose responses support this theme or highlight this theme. And then there is this conclusion, and there is a bit of discussion as well in the light of previous literature. So these are examples of how themes are, you can say, themes come out of the process of coding and analysis. But the qualitative analysis does not just stop at identifying codes and themes and supporting themes by empirical data or by quotes from the data. There is also the next thing that the researchers should do is to critically analyze and discuss their findings, which involves the interpretation of their findings and the connection and the discussion and the critical analysis of their findings in the light of previous scholarship or previous literature. So here is an example of that. Here we have a smaller discussion, but in larger studies where we have several themes, our discussion sections will be quite substantial. So for example, in this case, this is a sample or an example discussion. The findings support prior research that identifies the multidimensional nature of online student engagement, encompassing cognitive, emotional, and behavioral aspects. So here is a reference, sample reference. Students in this study face cognitive disengagement due to environmental and technical challenges, which echoes previous findings by whoever they are on digital divide, factors in online learning. Furthermore, the positive influence of interactive methods aligns with constructivist models of learning, which emphasizes active participation and social interaction. So you can say from the more descriptive presentation of data to a more analytical approach during the process of coding and theme development, and now a very critical analysis of the themes in the light of previous knowledge or scholarship that the researcher has access to and that the researcher has explored during the process of this research, you can see that this discussion section is a more critical section of the qualitative data analysis process. Now, here is again a section that actually highlights that further extrapolates the process of discussion. So the in vivo code, for example, I feel more interested, reinforces the idea that students are not passive recipients in online settings. Rather, they are activated by dynamic and socially rich instruction. Lastly, the themes of teacher presence confirms earlier frameworks like community inquiry, which positions teaching presence is essential for meaningful learning. So again, you can see that what the researcher does here is critically analyze his or her own findings in the light of previous scholarships, and so this is a more critical engagement on the part of the researcher. Now, towards the end, I would also like to give you some tips related to how to present the qualitative findings well. So first of all, generally it is important that our findings or the analysis, the results of our qualitative data analysis should be presented and structured by themes rather than by the questions that we ask the respondents. Secondly, we need to use subheadings for clarity and coherence. In many cases, when we do not make use of subheadings, or you can say sub-themes, many of the themes actually become very dense and quite confusing. So when we make use of sub-themes, that actually makes the process of the theme analysis or the presentation of themes more clear and coherent. We also need to include multiple participant quotes or themes from varied perspectives. So as I said previously, what we need to do is that each theme should be supported by enough data and by a variety of participants. There could be arguments and counter arguments related to a theme or a meaning in the data, and that should be supported by quotes and more quotes from the data. Then, although in some cases there could be some themes supported by minimum quotes, or in some cases even by one quote, but that quote might be substantial, that might be representing a substantial aspect of the issue that we have explored. So that's fine, but in most cases, themes should have enough support in our data. Then we need to integrate quotes, especially in vivo ones, into narrative and analysis. In vivo quotes are not generally should not be too frequent. We should have more axial quotes and more meaningful quotes, more theoretical quotes in our data. We need to interpret our themes and not just report the findings, but we need to be critical and analytical. So in this process, we need to link back our research findings to our research questions and the theory that is informing our research. And lastly, in order to present qualitative findings well and to do good thematic analysis, what we need to do is to respect the participants' voice. And so this actually means that quotes should illustrate and humanize the findings of the study.